Well, he was a very genial guy, very funny, roly-poly guy, quick-witted, immensely knowledgeable. He could write. He'd sit down at a typewriter, and he was like the fastest guy you've ever seen writing something. And the first drafts were pretty good. I mean, he would edit stuff and so forth, but it was amazing how fast he could write and how productive he was. I mean, you can see how many books and articles the man wrote.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Okay, welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 433. I'm talking to Bill Evers, who has been and is with the Independent Institute. Bill has been a long active in the liberty movement with the Libertarian Party, and we're going to talk about Bill's journey and some of the things he's observed along the way. How are you, Bill?
I'm fine, thank you. Good to see you, Chris.
And good to see you, too. So you're still at the Independent Institute?
I'm there, yes.
That's great. Yeah, it's a good organization. Been around a long time.
Yes.
So how did you first become a libertarian?
Well, I would say that it was reading in high school and working on debate in high school. So when I was a freshman in high school, had a debate on the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt and whether it was in the best interest of the United States. And my parents knew a man named George Crocker who wrote a book called Roosevelt's Road to Russia. So he was a prominent.
I've heard of that book.
Yeah, it's a Regnery book, early book. And he lent me John T. Flynn's The Roosevelt Myth. So that was one contributing thing. So another thing was in my sophomore year, I was in a debate on apartheid in South Africa, racial separation. And I was a subscriber to National Review as a freshman in high school. By the way, this was like, nobody was like this in those days. So we're talking in 1962, 63. Okay. So anyway, we're in this debate on apartheid. And I knew that National Review was pro-apartheid. So I didn't really have a clue completely about the nuances of what we might loosely call the right wing. So, but I read the Freeman, which was a magazine that came to my school library. So I wrote to the Freeman asking, I used to do things like I would write to my congressman and say, get me what you can on this topic. And in those days, they would do a lot. It was amazing. Anyway, so I wrote to the Freeman and I said, well, what do you have on apartheid? And I thought they would be pro-apartheid. When you do debate, you have to know both sides. So they sent me Bill Hutt's, W.H. Hutt's, The Economics of the Color Bar, which is an extremely anti-apartheid book from a classical liberal or libertarian standpoint. Among other things, it shows that the Boers, who were politically the Nationalist Party in South Africa, were the main instigators of apartheid. And in the mines, so there were diamond mines and gold mines in South Africa, the white workers did not want the blacks to advance into skilled positions. And so they were the ones that demanded apartheid, particularly the job reservations part of it. And they were very left-wing, as they were controlled by the labor unions were controlled by the Communist Party. And in the 1920s, they had a revolution, an attempted revolution in the mining areas of South Africa, where the Boers revolted against the British. And the British suppressed them and they hanged the leaders. The leaders went to their death singing the red flag, which is the ultra left-wing flag of the British labor movement. And they marched with banners saying, "Workers of the world unite for the white race." So I realized from this that the ideological spectrum was more sophisticated than I thought. So then when I was like a senior in high school, the New Republic magazine, which in those days was an extremely prominent and influential left of center left political magazine, ran a series called Thoughts of the Young Radicals. And it had Stokely Carmichael and it had Tom Hayden. Not all your listeners will know who these people are, but they were the superstars of the New Left, Black Power, and so forth movement of the 60s. And so one of the articles was by Ronald Hammaway, who was then a graduate student at Chicago under Hayek. And he wrote an article that they entitled Left and Right Meet, and it was about radical libertarianism. And so I said, whoa, this is what I believe. This is pretty good. So it's still a great article, by the way, if you can find it somehow. And so then I proceeded to go off to Stanford. And when I was at Stanford, I was unpacking my stuff and I came across this article, Left and Right Meet Again. And it said at the bottom, Ronald Hammaway is a teacher in the Western Civilization course at Stanford. And so I said, oh, well, I better go meet this guy. I hadn't even known he was there. So anyway, as I said, he was a teacher at Stanford in the Western Civ program, and he was part of the Circle Bastiat. He was part of the close friends of Murray Rothbard, so like Leonard Liggio and George Reisman and Ralph Raico and Joe Peden, and he was part of that group. They're in New York City, as well as being a graduate student of Hayek's. Even when teaching, he hadn't quite gotten his PhD finished yet. People do that. So anyway, so he was a pretty connected guy. And so he helped introduce me to some of these people. Another man that was somewhat influential was a man named Rod Maness. And Rod Maness had been head of Young Americans for Freedom in California and in Alabama. And he was, for a while, a research assistant to Roger Freeman at the Hoover Institution. Roger Freeman was a conservative guy who specialized in education policy, but some other things. Anyway, so Rod Maness was connected to the libertarian wing of the conservative Young Americans for Freedom. This was before the 1969 YAF convention in St. Louis that kind of kicked off the organized libertarian movement. Anyway.
Yeah.
So through Rod Maness, I got to know Dana Rohrbacher, then Bill Steele, who now calls himself Sean Steele, other people, a guy named Schumacher, different people that were the California libertarian figures. So then I went to the 1969 YAF convention in St. Louis, and there I met Don Ernsberger, Dan Walter, Carl Hess Jr., Walter Block, some other people. So that was sort of my beginning.
Would that have been David Walter, not Dan Walter?
Yes.
Yeah.
David Walter. Sorry. There's a there's a columnist in California named the other. So I apologize. David, though, is correct. Go ahead. New question.
Yeah, well, so were you involved with the YF walkout? I had Scott Tips on here talking about that.
Well, I was taught. So they had two caucuses there: the Libertarian Caucus and the even more hardcore Anarchist Caucus. And also, Rothbard wrote a pamphlet as an issue of Libertarian Forum called "Listen YAF," which he said the libertarians should leave YAF. So I was talking, I was more of a journalist, an activist journalist at this. I was actually there as a journalist from something called the Plain Rapper, which was the newspaper of the draft resistance. So anyway, so I was there, and they had this famous scene where a man burned a copy of his draft card, and but I got to know all the people. Jerry Tuccioli was there also. He was there. A lot of seminal figures in the early days of the libertarian movement were there. So I was both going on a scholarly prong and I was going on a movement prong. I was like, so Dana Rohrbacher's milling around and I tell him, get up on the table and tell them what you think. I was doing things like that. But anyway, I wasn't a decision maker because they had their own leaders of all this.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. I mean, I wasn't even alive then, so. So from there, did you end up going to work for think tanks, or what happened after that? I mean, you met some of the certain boss out. What was Rothbard like?
Well, he was a very genial guy, very funny, roly-poly guy, quick-witted, immensely knowledgeable. He could write. He'd sit down at a typewriter, and he was like the fastest guy you've ever seen writing something. And the first drafts were pretty good. I mean, he would edit stuff and so forth, but it was amazing how fast he could write and how productive he was. I mean, you can see how many books and articles the man wrote, as well as scholarly articles, as well as polemical articles.
Big articles, big books. Yeah, I mean, very, very productive man.
Right. Yeah. So, so at the very beginning, Rothbard was, he didn't think that the Libertarian Party was going to amount to anything. But Ed Crane lived in the Bay Area. He was a central early figure in the Libertarian Party and then in Cato Institute. And he died recently. Anyway, so Ed Crane
died,
Ed Crane came to Stanford, and he gave a talk at Stanford about the new Libertarian Party. So I introduced myself to him. I was somewhat skeptical, but he seemed like a real person. So that was one good sign of it. And so he got elected to be the head of the Libertarian Party nationally. And he immediately asked me to be the editor-in-chief of the newsletter, which was nothing. I mean, we essentially created it as a serious, substantive newsletter. So I did that for him, and so then after the Ed Clark for President campaign. So there was
Ed was chair from 74 to 77. Yeah,
it's complicated. I'm getting my years a little mixed up here. So anyway,
Ed was chair from 74 to 77. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
Chair of the Libertarian National Committee. So
I was I was on the national committee at least 81 to 87 and 93 to 96, maybe longer, but it was at least that. So anyway, so at some point in the late 70s, so 70, I don't know what it was. Anyway, Ed approached Charles Koch about setting up Cato Institute. And so I had been working with him on Libertarian Party stuff. And so he wanted me in this. So I was a second employee after him. He was the first employee. And so we were going to set up a magazine called Inquiry, which we did. And so Inquiry ran from 76. So Cato started in 76, 77, and we started Inquiry then, and I was on it until, say, around 80. And then there was the so-called split in the Coctopus, and the magazine lasted a little longer after that. I was the
What magazine was that?
chief.
What magazine was that?
Inquiry magazine.
Oh yeah, Inquiry. Yeah, that was an interesting. Yeah, are those issues out there anywhere right now? The old issues of Inquiry?
Well, here's the thing. They used to be on Ron Unz's. Unz made deals.
Oh, really?
With political magazines, and so he got the rights to put them up on his website, but the copyright owner was Cato.
Oh,
so Cato took them back.
Yes.
And they're buried somewhere in libertarianism.org in a black hole. Now, I went to there was a dinner at Cato honoring Charles Koch, and I talked to the man there who runs the mechanical side of libertarianism.org, and he assured me that they were going to put everything up, but they haven't. So I had a particular thing. There were 3 articles by Thomas Saz on psychiatric abuse in the Soviet Union, and I wanted to include them in a curriculum that I'm doing on comparative political and economic systems, socialism, capitalism, and fascism. And I had to get them to individually photocopy each page and send me files because they haven't done the project yet. But I think they will do it. It's just, not a high priority for them. It's too bad. A good university library should have them. That's about it.
Saying a good university library has Inquiry?
Yeah. So we had Thomas Saz, as I mentioned. We had Nat Hentoff, who was a civil liberties writer, famous from the Village Voice.
Nat Hentoff wrote for the Village Voice. He was great. I don't think he was a pure libertarian, but he was always very good on civil liberties.
Very good on civil liberties. And we had Robert Sherrill, who was another sort of left liberal, populist type guy. And we had a couple things from Noam Chomsky at a time when nobody would publish him except us. So he was extremely grateful.
Yeah, that's wild. I knew about Chomsky being an Inquiry.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people. That might shock.
We had Nicholas von Hoffman, who was kind of a center-left guy, but he had a libertarian streak to him. He had some close friends who were libertarians as part of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we had lots and lots of other first-rate writers. So it was a high-powered magazine.
Yeah, I should also point out Charles Koch is still alive, but David died in 2019.
Correct.
Inquiry.
I knew David too.
Who is reading Inquiry?
Well, it's hard to know. We didn't poll people and ask them.
Did you have any numbers? I mean, how many were?
I don't remember how many subscribers we had. We had some, and also it went to library.
Was it weekly, monthly, or how often was it?
Well, it's changed. At the beginning, I would say it was every 2 weeks, and then it probably changed to being every month.
Yeah.
And then eventually, when it was killed, it was merged into Libertarian Review.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a newsletter. Yeah, I believe there was also the Libertarian Review Foundation for a while.
Right.
Yeah,
that I think owned it at its final days, but that was a creature of the same people that we've been talking about.
Well, I think also the Libertarian Review Foundation also was affiliated to some extent with what became Laissez-Faire Books.
Yeah, it was. But
And
I don't know. I don't know the ins and outs of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew Andrea Rich is not alive, but Howie Rich is still alive.
Yes.
I knew them both pretty well. I knew the
Yeah, I know,
founders.
yeah.
I knew the founders of Laissez-Faire Books in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Sharon Presley, also now deceased. John Mueller, also now deceased.
Yes, Sharon Presley. Yeah, Andrea and Howard were always in New York, and they kind of had a store there, I think. So it was a New York, San Francisco thing.
Right.
And of course, Roy Childs was also in New York, and it's wild. We had a lot of libertarians involved in San Francisco and New York at one time, and just overall California.
I of course knew Roy Childs very well, also.
Yeah. What was I don't know if I've ever had anybody on here talk about Roy. What was Roy like?
Well, so he was the same age as me. So I'm born in 1948. He never finished college, so that kind of affected was kind of something in the background of him that I don't know. He was extremely well read. He was 100 times better read than most college graduates. It's not like, I mean,
well, he wrote that
most Harvard graduates or Stanford or Princeton graduates. So
he
was a very, very learned person. He also was a quite fast writer. I mentioned that Rothbard was. Roy loved to be on the telephone. He would call and call, and sometimes he would be writing as he was calling his people. And so that created a lot of influence for him. He had this magazine that he was putting out. He and I had some strategic differences. He hoped to unite the anti-nuclear power movement with the libertarian movement. I was more doubtful about that. Rothbard was also more doubtful about it. That was one of the things that led to people taking different directions.
It seems like different people.
Early 1980s there.
Yeah, if you get 10 libertarians in a room, they'll all 10 of them want to try to form a different alliance with some group.
Right. Well,
unfortunately, though, and Roy died rather young because, as far as I know, from what I always heard, he was extremely overweight.
He was extremely overweight. Yes.
Yeah, he not the only.
So Charles Koch tried to help him to try, funded him getting medical treatment and things, but it just he died
because he was only like 44 or something, I think. Yeah.
Well, he had a lot of health problems. So, very smart guy. I don't want to claim that. So he and I were sort of rivals. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to look back and characterize everything easily and quickly.
Yep.
But he had his magazine and I had mine, and on and on. So anyway.
Yeah,
we were different. I was much more involved in the Libertarian Party than he was.
Yeah,
he really wasn't involved in it.
Yeah, I think Roy. I think some people would just rather do the more intellectual work than the party work, and I can't blame them. I mean, there's a lot of different work.
I have done both. After I left the Libertarian Party, I became reasonably prominent Republican. I served on the State Central Committee in California for a long time, until January of last year.
Oh, for the red team?
I worked for a lot of presidential, Senate, and governor candidates in California. And I was U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education for Policy under George W. Bush. Also, I ran the schools in Iraq under George W. Bush. And for Trump Pence, I ran, or sometimes co-ran the transition team pertaining to the Department of Education in 2016. So I had some, I don't want to say top level. I mean, in the Libertarian Party, I was at the top level. I was at middle level in the Republican Party, but reasonably well respected and influential. So
Yeah. So how do you think you made a difference?
Well, are we talking about Libertarian Party? Or are we talking about Republican Party? Or what are we just talking about my life?
What do you think? What do you think? How are things for the better because you were involved with these? Yeah.
Well, I think I helped professionalize the Libertarian Party, and I helped put it. I mean, I wrote many of the platform planks that the party had.
Yeah.
They've mostly been gutted by now. But we had a really detailed alternative to public policy in those existed in those days. That was, and I read the newspapers assiduously. I still do. I have a podcast that I do that covers the news for the Independent Institute, so I'm still kind of on top of the news and responding to it. So I helped launch the party newspaper. I was a lieutenant for Ed Crane and doing a lot of things in the Libertarian Party until we came to a parting of the ways. The time of the Bergland nomination and the nuclear power controversy and these different things. That's when we went different ways. I again, a very able guy. He had a certain. You have to say that many people who are influential and make things happen have some my way or the highway type attitudes to them. It's not unusual in business or nonprofits or in anything. Journalism, it's part of being an effective doer a lot of the time. Not everybody. You'll find very congenial people who are also effective and aren't that way. But Ed was, definitely a my way or the highway type guy. And the people that were associated with him thought he was right enough at the time that they went along with it. And, on some big things, I had some strategic differences. And one major difference between me and Rothbard and Crane is that Rothbard and I thought that what we would probably today call the Trumpian population had a libertarian potential. And you could see this in the Ron Paul, the father's presidential campaign, and in the Tea Party. Okay. So those are the kinds of things that Rothbard and I thought were the basis to change the country. Crane, he didn't oppose reaching out to those people, and we didn't oppose reaching out to white collar people and suits and whatever you want to call them. But Ed thought that business leaders and maybe other think tank people and what you might call establishment, meaning it in a kind way, not a harsh way, people were the way to go. And then also the Trumpian type masses, but they weren't going to be as important and as influential in his point of view. Well, so that was kind of a difference between the two approaches. And in practice, it meant they had different ideas of what to do or what stance to take on things.
I don't know who would have been the Trumpians back then, but what was
well, David Nolan, Ed Clark and his wife, the whole Coalition for a Party of Principle group, John Mason. I could try and name M.L. Hansen, most of the California Party. Anyway, there were plenty of good people on both sides, and there were some not so good people as in any large number of people. So
Yeah.
it's a shame. It's a shame that there was a split, and
yeah,
it clearly weakened the effectiveness of the Libertarian Party.
I don't know if the Libertarian Party has ever gotten back the momentum that it had at the time. I mean, it really seemed like it was going in a positive direction, and that just kind of threw a monkey wrench into everything.
Yeah, it wasn't good. It's when you're running political campaigns, you have to take a course of action. You have to decide who's your constituency that you're reaching out to. How are you going to phrase, the bulk of your campaign material and so forth. It's hard to do it split down the middle some way, and so the people who quit were the Crane side.
Yeah. Murray Rothbard often referred to it as the Crane machine. If you read his Libertarian Forum,
he was very organized. Murray was a polemicist, and so he's going to call people by different names. Having been in the Crane machine and against the Crane machine, it wasn't a machine in that everybody just automatically followed orders, but it was a constellation, I think is maybe more like it.
But Bill, it almost, as I've looked at the history of the Liberty movement, it seems like, and maybe this just is something that happens to a lot of thinkers, and maybe it just happens to a lot of people, but they start off hanging out with people who challenge them and people who are intellectual equals who disagree with them. But and I think because of that because they're occasionally challenged, they actually get smarter. But then eventually the challengers kind of drift away, and eventually these people are surrounded by a bunch of yes men who just nod their heads and tell them how great they are. Do you think that's what happened? That is what has happened to some of these people in the Liberty movement? I mean,
well, I think one good thing about the Liberty movement is, since we're a minority in the society, we're always subject to challenge. Our own families, there are often some people that don't agree with us. Our work associates are often people who don't agree with us. Now, you can have a libertarian institution, and you can have, this is true of General Motors or whatever, in any, or the Red Cross. You're going to immediately surrounded by people that get along with you, okay, and that you can work with. Now, it also makes sense to try to have a kitchen cabinet that includes some people who are the devil's advocate, or that challenge you, that are you're friendly enough that you don't take it personally, but you have indicated to them that you expect them and value their candid criticism. We actually tried to have that in the Ed Clark for President campaign. We had a literature review board that was supposed to say, okay, Crane, you're going to run the campaign, but we're going to have this literature review board. And because you have a tendency to try to, maybe shade the most serious libertarian things and make them very palatable and watered down, we're going to watch that. And so that was the agreement that we had all going into the Ed Clark for President campaign. And from my point of view, Crane couldn't stand that, so he just said, I'm not going to go along with it, even though he had agreed to it, and the presidential candidate had agreed to it. And so that really, that made it impossible to work, for the people to work together anymore.
And of course, part of what made that,
if he were alive, he would tell it differently. Like, he would probably say, how could I possibly work with those guys, or something like that. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe so. Yeah.
They were people he had worked together with for years. So, I think he could have figured it out. But anyway.
Do you know why Crane split with Rothbard?
Yeah, I've been telling you some of it. It was partly over nuclear power. It was partly over the strategic thing of what part of the American populace is most interested in possibly taking libertarian ideas. Part of it had to do with Austrian school of economics. So, in principle, Crane and Rothbard were both, for the Austrian school. In developing the Cato Institute, Crane needed people who would analyze policy. So there's a medical plan, there's a transportation plan, there's a change in banking regulations, whatever. So he needed people that would write articles, write books, write pamphlets on this stuff from a libertarian standpoint. And so he needed economists. So one of the problems was that I'm being very generous to him here, by the way. But anyway, one of the problems was that many of the Austrian people were very abstract. They were very interested in methodological issues, and they weren't that interested in current issues. Many of the Chicago people, they just said they weren't interested in methodological issues.
Yeah.
They had their theory that economics was like physics, and that was it. And then they're going to go crunch the numbers. And so Crane began using them. And Rothbard was a little bit grumpy. Things were not too bad. But then a nice guy, but a very strongly Friedman Chicago school guy, got taken on, and it was without consulting Rothbard. And he was not happy about that. I really can't blame him because he was the chief economist there. The guy, from our point of view at that point, seemed pretty hostile to Austrian economics. As time has gone on, he is pretty friendly. He's personally a friendly guy. I don't want to name his name, but the thing is, and he has, in things he's done, he's given fair attention to Austrian economics. He is a Friedman Chicago school guy. I don't want to pretend that he isn't, but he doesn't dismiss, or he isn't hostile or crusading against Austrian economics. So anyway, that contributed heavily to it.
Yeah.
You've now heard the reasons.
Yeah, I think some of which of course wasn't the case with Mises, because Mises actually was, it's funny, some of the Austrians were actually listening to him in the early 30s before the rise of the Nazis. I mean, he actually had some influence on Dollfuss and people who were kind of dictators, but he was trying to get maybe.
I don't know enough about that to speak authoritatively, but I know Ralph Raico has done a paper on. The late Ralph Raico did a paper on. Mises and fascism and what his attitude was. He was anti-fascist, but he could also see that communists were violent, and so
I mean, I'm not I'm not
saying Mises was perfect on this, but he wasn't nearly what left-wing critics of libertarianism would say. He was an anti-fascist. I mean, he wrote Omnipotent Government is a book completely against fascism.
I mean, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, but if Donald Trump called me up and offered me a job someplace, I might give that a shot and try to make a difference.
Right.
If I can make a difference, I mean,
you can always leave if you don't like it.
I can always quit if it doesn't make a difference. I mean, that's it's so it is interesting. It seems like the Austrians. As I said, they really, sometimes I think you have these I call them the monastery libertarians. They just want to go out to the monastery and write books and read and debate among themselves.
Well,
and they don't really care if they have any influence on the real world.
Well, you need both, and you need also
we need we absolutely definitely need the monastery libertarians.
Well, they're they're going to advance the
Yeah.
intellectual foundations of libertarian thought.
But
They're going to take care that things are defined carefully and discussed carefully, and the evidence is piled up. They're very important.
yeah,
The,
I
the,
just
the activists, the people who are engaged in politics or economic policy debates, they're also extremely important. I don't think
yeah.
you can't really have one without the other. So you need
Yeah,
both.
I agree with you. I just wish the monastery libertarians would stop attacking some of the people who are out there outside the monastery. I mean, who are trying to do the work and maybe make a difference and influence people. It seems like the monastery libertarians kind of relish in not being well known. It's like somebody once said about being a Star Trek fan. He said it was a lot more fun when everybody thought we were crazy. But anyway, we'll.
Well, I think
Yeah.
the two most prominent libertarians in the United States right now are Rand Paul and Thomas Massey. I think pretty well of both of them. I mean, again, I'm not saying they're perfect. I think Massey's a little hopped up about the Epstein
Yeah.
file, but
Yeah.
he's basically good, and Rand Paul's basically good. Again, they're not perfect. I think if I examined every vote, there'd be some differences. And that was also true of Ron Paul, the father.
Yeah.
I think it's a difficult thing to do, but they're doing pretty well. And they're keeping libertarian. So one reason to have the Libertarian Party that all the early people thought was in an election campaign, people who, most people don't pay any attention to politics. It's not part of their lives. They might know football, they might know their kid's soccer team, they might know yoga, meditation, whatever it is they know, but most of them don't know politics. A small percent of the population does. But at election time, they pay attention a little bit anyway, more than they had before. So one of the thoughts of the Libertarian Party was, well, maybe we're not going to elect a president, or maybe it'll take a while, something like that, but we'll get people's attention and we can present a pretty full-fledged libertarian position that people can consider. I still think that's a reasonable thought.
So Crane walked out of LP National in '83 just because he, was like it was my way or the highway.
I think that was it. Yeah.
Well, I have a feeling there were probably
his candidate lost. The people associated with Bergland tried to get some of the Crane people to stick around and stay in the campaign, but they weren't able to. So, it's they didn't have. They didn't have to. They could do something else. A lot of them did other things in the liberty movement, as you call it, that were still productive. I think Cato Institute, again, not perfect, but it's done a lot of good, just as other groups like Reason and Heartland and Liberty Magazine and all sorts of groups have been a helpful thing to the world and to America.
I want to put things in context here. Let's keep in mind in 1983, people wrote letters. They didn't even make long distance phone calls. And so this was a completely different era, but
completely different.
Going and at the time the presidential ticket was nominated in 1983 for the 1984 elections. They nominated ahead of time.
Yes.
I believe
that was because of the need to spend a lot of time and money on ballot access.
Yes, but also
still a problem for the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, but I wanted to bring up also though, there was actually a guy running for president going into all this named Gene Burns, right? And he apparently dropped out a week before the national convention. So, what's the story about Gene Burns?
Well, Gene was a radio talk show host. I knew him pretty well. I mean, I kind of brought him into the whole thing. I mean, he was already a libertarian.
Yeah.
But I was involved in negotiating with him the idea of him running for president. So he was the candidate of essentially the the non-Crane people. Okay.
Yeah.
And he is very articulate. Anyway, a fabulous speaker.
Yeah. Are there any videos or
Has,
clips of him speaking out there by chance?
I don't know of any, but I'm sure there are some.
You never know. Yeah.
The point is, he wanted to do this, but he also had the hope that he could get some Koch money and some of the Koch Crane people to. At that time, Koch and Crane were close. Eventually, they had a radical falling out. But anyway, that's later. That's like in the 90s or whatever. 2000. That's like 10 years.
We'll get into that later.
I don't really know that much about.
Stay in the 80s right now.
I mean, I've talked to some of the principals about it, but I don't really know.
Let's stay in.
Let's stay where I really know. Yeah. Okay, so Gene Burns was traveling around the country. He went to the different Libertarian parties around the country.
Yeah.
He was raising money, and we were approaching the convention. We had all our literature, everything was ready to go to the convention. So he went and he visited with the Koch people. I don't know where. I mean, maybe he went to Kansas. I don't know. Anyway, the point is,
they were from Kansas. Yeah, they were around Wichita.
Koch is from Wichita. So anyway, he went wherever. Maybe they went to him. I don't really know what happened, where the geography was. But anyway, they essentially said to him, okay, we'll back you, but Crane has to run the campaign, and he has to be able to run it with an iron fist. I don't think they use the word iron fist, but he has to have complete control. Okay. And Burns said, well, I worked all along with these other people, and, they're expecting to participate in the campaign, and I can't really just throw them overboard. And the Koch Crane people said, well, you have to if you're going to go with us and get our money. So, Burns he was a very amiable guy. He was not an acerbic person, a difficult person. He had some difficult aspects to it too, but basically he was a get along type guy. And he had, he had aides and stuff like that from his radio stuff that were also effective people. Mm-hmm. Anyway, point is, when he realized there was going to be no Koch money and no help from the Koch Crane people and no help in fundraising from them, he just threw in the towel. So we, who had been working for his campaign, so Honey Lanham was the executive director of the party at that time, David Bergland, me, Sharon Ayers, David Bergland's wife, all these different people, David Walter, Don Ernstberger, David Nolan, we were all supporting Gene Burns. So Emil Franzi was another guy from Arizona, very influential in all this. He was like a wizard of the floor of the convention.
It seems like Burns would have gotten it if he'd stayed in.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
So they had no other rival candidate.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he dropped out. So the Crane people recruited Earl Ravenel, who was a international affairs professor at Georgetown. Very nice guy. I already knew him from back in 1976 when I worked on the McBride campaign.
Yeah.
I had found an article by him advocating a non-interventionist foreign policy. I brought it to Crane's attention, and we made Ravenel's acquaintance at that time. But anyway, point is, Ravenel was a nice guy, but he was going to only be working with the Crane people. And I talked to him, but it didn't look like that was going to work out. So David Bergland had run as vice presidential candidate with McBride.
76, yep.
And I don't know what he'd run for, but he'd run for some other things like U.S. Senate in California or something. I don't know what. Anyway, he was experienced. He was obviously a hardcore libertarian. And so we just took all our literature and stripped out Gene Burns and put in David Bergland and went to the convention and tried to put him over. And we also had a race for party chairman at that time. Kent Guida was the candidate of the Crane people. And I guess John Mason was our candidate. But also Alicia Clark ran. And so she was a popular favorite, and she ended up getting the position. And I got along with her fine, but she and Crane did not get along at all. I mean, it was like very hostile. So anyway, that also contributed to this hiving off of people.
Yeah, and also Mary Ruward had her was also at Tony Nathan.
Yeah. Well, she never knew her all that well. I mean, I certainly knew her. She represented a lot of it was a sort of a cultural feeling, feel good about liberty, feel good about libertarianism. Don't be too hard-nosed. Don't be putting people off, kind of thing. She had her supporters. She never, at least in those years, she didn't make it to the top. But yeah, she was in it.
Yeah. So, of course, a lot of people probably didn't know who it all was running when they got in. So Bergland got the nomination, and of course, right. the chair vote also went against the Kochs, I guess, as well.
Right.
So I mean, I'm just saying, maybe if the Kochs had gotten the chair position, they might not have left.
Well, they had a very weak candidate.
Yeah.
So I mean, he was a guy. He was an okay guy, but nobody knew him. But
I think, well, the other thing too is like professors generally don't make that good of politicians. They're smart people.
But I mean, again, as I've said, he wasn't going to be holding office. He was going to be going around and talking to journalists and talking to party groups around the country and trying to gin up local stories and a few national stories. Also, you just never know in politics. Politics is very unpredictable.
Yeah.
Something could. So I don't know how old you are to remember that Perot almost upset the presidential election.
Oh yeah,
that he ran, and I mean he did affect the final result, but he almost caused an implosion of the Republican Party. And with some similar, so he appealed to what we might call the Trumpian constituency today. He appealed to some kind of part of it anyway, just as Pat Buchanan also appealed to another part of it.
I don't think Perot was going to implode the Republican Party, but he could. I think he really could have had a chance if he'd stayed in there, and it would have been very interesting if he. He dropped out for a while.
I can tell you from witnessing the whole thing. Before he started behaving wacko and dropping in and out, he was having unbelievable momentum, and it was shocking. All right, I'm not an expert
so
on
Kochs, the
parole.
Kochs walk out, and so
Yeah.
that's really so, and that was they were really, and none of the people in that. So were you at Cato, or what were you doing there yourself at the time?
Well, I'm going to say that during the Ed Clark for President campaign, I left Cato and went to the Institute for Humane Studies as a
Yeah.
residential scholar there.
Yeah.
And so Crane was in Washington at that time.
Yeah. And of course, the Kochs give a lot of money to IHS. Yes.
Right. But I mean, at that time, Charles Koch was trying to keep everything very in lockstep. And over time, he's gotten more pluralistic, which I think is wise. So he has groups that he has a lot of influence on and is donating to, but he's not trying to micromanage them. And I think that, that gives him more free time, but it also, I think it's healthier for the life of the movement for liberty. So he's done a tremendous amount of good. When he was in this more lockstep thing, if he made a strategic mistake, which he sometimes did, it meant that all these groups were all going off the cliff with him. So that was a bit not good for the organizational life of the movement at that time. So that was a possible problem that existed. I never was into attacking Charles Koch, attacking David Koch. I kind of stayed friends throughout with David Koch. He even gave me some money when I ran for Congress. I went to a party for him at the Republican convention. He invited me to be in his inner circle at this party. He gave me money when I was working at Hoover Institution. Charles Koch and I see each other a few times a year. We're on good terms, especially since he decided that Ed Crane was a problem. I also tried to stay, in okay terms with the Crane Koch people.
Yeah.
So I wasn't out to be personal about this. I did have differences with them. Some of them wouldn't talk to me for 10 or 20 years, but now the ones that are alive, they're all on speaking terms with me and I with them. So it's not forgotten, but it's definitely completely smoothed over.
So what happened with Ed Crane and Cato?
Well, so the governing structure of Cato is very weird. It started out in 1976 as the Charles G. Koch Foundation or something like that. And Charles changed its name to the Cato Institute, which he got from Rothbard's suggestion to name it after Cato's letters, the Trenchard and Gordon Libertarian pamphlets at the time before the American Revolution. And also, National Review had a very right-wing columnist at that time that used the pen name Cato. And so Rothbard thought, not only is this a great name for us, but we'll kind of be giving the needle to National Review, who has this other thing called Cato. So anyway, so when it was created, they created shares. So they had a board. The board was really advisory. They made decisions, but they were really advisory decisions. So the board were business people and some intellectuals, but the shareholders were and I maybe get this wrong, but I think they were Charles Koch, Roger McBride, George Pearson, who was a major employee of Charles Koch's intellectual outreach efforts at that time, and Murray Rothbard. So at the time of the split in the 80s, they voted to take away Rothbard's shares. So he made a big deal about this. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but he made a big deal out of it. So anyway, they still kept this background thing. And Charles was giving not very much money anymore, as he had other priorities. He sort of thought a lot of his early money was seed money, and that Crane needed to go out and raise money, make it self-sufficient. And I think that was probably healthy in its own way. But anyway, they kept this background power thing that existed. So for various reasons, I've heard stories, but since I don't have firsthand knowledge of it, you have to remember that all these people have strong personalities, and a lot of the time they get along. And when a bunch of strong personalities are working together, it can be amazingly productive, and they can get a lot done. But sometimes they have different ideas, and when they have different ideas, it can make for a kind of a bloody clash of some sort. So anyway, Crane got tired of Koch having this background power, and Koch got tired of Crane for various reasons. I've always found, I'm sure Koch has always been extremely pleasant to me. He's obviously a hard-nosed person, but he has always been very polite and friendly to me. Crane is more difficult to get along with, and I think, eventually the two of them rub each other the wrong way. So anyway, Koch said Crane should go. The board of Cato, which had been operating the thing in a sense, even though technically it only had this advisory role, wanted to get the shares back. Koch said, I'm not giving you the shares back if Crane is going to stay in power. So the truce or agreement or settlement or whatever was Koch and whoever else he had. I don't know exactly what had happened to all the shares. I think George Pearson might still be alive. He lives in Kansas. McBride is dead. I don't know what happened to the shares. But anyway, the shares were under some control. So Koch gave them back. They did some kind of reorganization. Crane retired. They put in several new people since that as the president. This is mostly a fundraising position. The executive vice president for under Crane and then after Crane was David Bose, and so he's also died since all this pretty recently. And he kept it going in the kind of Crane style, but without the more acerbic and difficult and for some people divisive aspects of Crane. And Bose is another smart and able guy, but definitely Crane's lieutenant. Oh. And then was able to stand on his own 2 feet.
I am trying to figure out, with Crane being forced out of COVID, if Ed Crane would have taken, because COVID was, or Cato was so many people at Cato just didn't say anything about the coronavirus nonsense, and it was just horrible to see the silence coming out of there. Yeah.
Well, we were an independent institute. We work with Scott Atlas all the time.
Yeah.
One of our top scholars is Phil Magnus, who put together the people to do the Great Barrington Declaration. There's a lot of different ideas circulating around the COVID pandemic. I mean, basically, we're a public policy institute. We're not a medical foundation or something like that. So, and we're for liberty. And so we're going to be wanting to have things that maximize liberty. And there are, this actually is not just snap answer. If you have a highly contagious, dangerous disease, we can get into all this, but hypothetically, it's not called COVID-19, it's called X. And you go around transmitting it, maybe that's a form of aggression. On the other hand, quarantining you and doing a lot of unnecessary coercive things is certainly violating your liberty. And so how to work this out, it's not just a simple thing. There are clearly wrong things that were done by the federal and state governments. And so the Independent Institute was certainly articulate on that. And so
when you weren't around.
I can't.
Yeah.
I wasn't following perfectly closely the different libertarian groups to see exactly what the nuances were between them. I will say there's a sort of an ex-libertarian guy who's a Princeton professor who wrote a very, very good book on it. Unfortunately, his name is skipping my mind, but it will probably occur to me before the end of this. We should consider wrapping some of this up too.
Yeah, were you at so you weren't at LP National after 83, were you?
Well, I don't know exactly when I switched.
Well, Ron Paul was nominated in 87.
I was still in the Libertarian Party then.
So I don't know where you, and Rothbard apparently walked out in 89. I don't know if you were there for that.
Yeah, I was there for that. I did not agree with him. He walked out. What precipitated him walking out were there were two candidates for national chair. Matt Monroe, who was a doctor from Houston, very nice guy, very generous guy to the party, but not somebody super well known in the libertarian movement. A smart guy. And so there was Matt Monroe, and there was David Walter. And he had been chair of the Pennsylvania Party, and he had been in the libertarian movement going back to the middle 1960s in Young Americans for Freedom and the Liberty Caucus there. And he knew many, many people. Plus, he'd been on the national committee. I think he was already chairman. Maybe somebody resigned and he was holding an interim or something like that. Anyway, the point is, I think he was running as a kind of an incumbent. It might have been a quasi-incumbent. Anyway, there was no reason to get rid of him. He was doing a good job. And Murray was personal friends with Matt Monroe. Anyway, so Murray took it very seriously. And so that precipitated it, but there were other things. One of the things was that Lou Rockwell served on many platform committees with me. He knew a lot about various things. And he was the head of the Mises Institute, and Rothbard was working closely with him. But Lou really didn't like the Libertarian Party. He just wasn't for him. It was more of a stylistic thing. Maybe he didn't like the people. He maybe thought they were too, I don't know, they had too many odd cultural views, in his view, which is, that's not a crazy thought that there are some unusual people in the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian movement. There are. So anyway, so Lou, didn't feel like associating with all of them. So he would kind of try and nudge Murray away from the party. And eventually enough things came together that Rothbard left. The actual thing that precipitated it was this national.
Yeah, well, also apparently Rothbard was complaining, oh, you didn't invite me to speak. And somebody held up a letter showing that, this is your letter turning down the speaking invite. So I guess that was
I don't know. People get hopped up.
Well, I got that story.
The thing is, so Rothbard got that wrong.
Yeah.
But the thing is, essentially, by pointing out that he was wrong, they were kind of insulting him. And here was like the genius of the libertarian movement.
Well,
and yes, he got it wrong. And yes, he was harsh in talking about it.
Yeah.
But it's too bad there wasn't a more delicate way to point that out to him. You're right that also affected him. And again, factually he was wrong, but in terms of respect, which you want to show an elder statesman and really, I don't know. I can understand how he took it. And I can also understand how the person who had the letter was provoked to show it. I'm too understanding, but anyway, it meant that he wasn't going to be involved anymore.
Well, this is one of the problems in the Libertarian Party is there are too many people who see disagreement as an insult, and or just have So, well, you said you didn't have much time left, so I guess that's about where we're gonna.
Well, we can stop now, but if
you said you had to. So
yeah, I do.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
It's been interesting to go over this.
Left you want to say? Yeah.
I don't know. I've seen a lot, and
And where can we find you out there?
At the Independent Institute in Oakland. We're at 100 Swan Way.
Well, you don't have a website or anything, so
I on the independent.org.
Yes.
You can go to people, and then you can go to fellows, and then you can go to me. And there's a ton of my articles. I write stuff. I write also curriculum. I've created recently a curriculum on ethnic studies that can be used. And I've created a curriculum on socialism, capitalism, and fascism that can be used. And just anybody can use it right now. But I wrote mostly about education policy. As I said, I was U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education for Policy. Delighted to be with you, Chris.
Well, thank you, Bill. It was nice to have you on. Yeah. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications. Check out my novels.
There's going to be a way to post this on my own Facebook page, right?
You should be able to share the links. Please check out my Substack. Go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. People are giving me money to buy me a coffee. Thank you, Bill Evers. I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.